In 1935, in Akron, Ohio, an alcoholic stockbroker told his story to an alcoholic physician. Both had been diagnosed as hopeless, but by talking to each other, they stayed sober. And from their sobriety came Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps. Still today, these steps are proving to be uniquely effective as a method of recovery from the devastation of alcoholism and other life-threatening addictive diseases. It is estimated that there are 13 million alcoholics and drug addicts in North America today, and that up to 130 million lives are profoundly impacted by these diseases. What you are about to see is taken from the true stories of actual people who have come back from the edge, some even from the brink of death itself. These courageous individuals are among the 5 to 7 million North Americans who are recovering from their addictions through regular use of a 12-step program. They tell us what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now.
I bit through the glass stem of the pipe, jamming it into my mouth and cut my lip.
I started running away from home when I was like 11 years old, and the cops used to take me back, but once I got to be 14 or 15, they didn't take me back anymore.
So I had to go to emergency. 18 stitches.
My mom was killed with an axe bolt to her head. I started drinking when I was 10.
And I didn't want to go back there, you know. My father, he beat me up when I was a kid, and then he left. And my mother, you know, has her own addictions and stuff, so I didn't have anywhere to go.
Of course, I didn't go right away. I had to stay smoking till all the coke was gone.
For years, I spent most of my time and all of my energy trying to fix my alcoholic husband, which is an addiction in itself.
I blacked out almost every night. I'd wake up the next morning and I'd not know what I'd done.
I assumed his drinking was my fault, which God knows he told me often enough that it was.
I drank behind closed doors, closed curtains, closed windows.
And when I started drinking, I became a different person. I got really wild and violent.
Fundamental to all addictions and related dependencies is the frustrating and bewildering phenomenon of denial. These alcoholics and addicts were convinced that they didn't have a dependency problem, or that if they did, they could handle it. They sincerely believed that their lives were normal and that they were in control. Recovery couldn't begin until this denial was replaced by acceptance of their disease. The process of surrender is a life or death issue and doesn't happen without real pain and struggle.
I started drinking when I was 10. And I beat up my teacher when I was 13. By the time I was in my mid-teens, I was fighting in the bars all the time.
I started to drink when I was about 15 years old. It was an accident. I didn't know that the punch was spiked with alcohol. And I remember feeling warm and confident and not afraid.
I remember getting drunk the first time I had a drink, thrashing around in the bathtub all night. My clothes on, drinking one Mickey, then another. I had a great time. I had a great time.
My husband and I were out for dinner, and he got really drunk, which wasn't anything new. But this time he pretended to be very funny, and he threw up, or pretended to throw up all over the table. And we laughed and acted like it was a big joke, but I didn't think it was funny.
Alcohol was magic for me. Worked fantastic. I could talk to anyone, introduce myself to anyone, play any sport, discuss any idea, meet any girl, do anything. play the Don Juan, go anywhere, confront any situation. All the courage you could ever want. It was magic for me.
For many alcoholics, at least, who are not perhaps addictive drinkers from their first drink, early on, drinking was pleasurable. They had the experience of a normal social drinker, and people drank, and alcohol is a nice social lubricant, and probably many business deals would not be done, and much pleasantry. For the alcoholic, they get past that stage, and this sort of drinking brings mainly misery. Somehow there's this mystical belief that they can get back to that original experience where drinking alcohol was okay and was positive.
I mean, it has to be to the point where the drug is really no longer working, so that people are receptive to the information that's coming in that it's not working. As long as there's anything out there that is going to enable the person to continue using, some way that they can continue to deny the reality of what's happened, that they'll persist in that denial to death. I mean, that's literally what we're dealing with, life and death.
My lungs felt like they were going to collapse every day from smoking crack. Although we didn't call it crack, only the newspapers called it crack, we called it rock. And when my lungs felt like they were going to collapse, and I only weighed 100 pounds, and I weigh like 125 normally.
And then he got abusive with the waitress, so I got him out as fast as I could. And I came back in to pay the bill, and I said to the cashier that that's my husband, and he's really drunk, and I'm really sorry. And she said, "Lady, if that's your husband, I'm really sorry for you."
Now, I've been living in a crack house. There's 2 crack houses, one beside each other, and they both got busted within a few days, and I didn't get busted, but the crack houses were busted, so I had no place to go. And a friend of mine had a car that didn't have a motor or anything in it. It was just parked. I lived there for a few weeks, which was pretty horrible. And after I was in the car, then I went to the Salvation Army. And there I was living in a Salian, and I was 21 years old.
I first started to notice it in my late 20s. I just wasn't performing on the field the way I know I can. So to compensate, I got into cocaine, crystal meth, uppers, and I was partying more than ever. My friends would leave the party at 3 in the morning, and I'd still be going at 3 the next afternoon. And I thought I was normal. I thought everybody wants to live like this. At least everybody who's anybody.
In graduate school, I had this relationship with this man, my one and only great relationship, and he broke it off after 6 months. At the same time, I was working on my dissertation, and I was feeling pressure, and I felt overwhelmed. And I found if I drank half a pint, in about 3 or 4 minutes, my whole body would become anesthetized. I fell asleep really quickly. I always found a reason to drink. By the time I hit bottom, I was drinking a bottle a day, every day.
So what we're talking here is a gram of Coke every day, day in, day out, for 10 years. And the last year, it was 3 or 4 grams a day, on top of a quart of vodka. Whatever I needed to get me as far away from life as I needed to be. And the further you go, the further you need to go. The scarier life is when you come back. So there's only one place, eventually, that you can go. And that's death. Business was bankrupt. My car, my furniture had been repossessed. My phone had been disconnected. And I'd been evicted from my apartment. My wife and children were long gone. And the rest of my family didn't want to have anything to do with me.
Well, the people, in the crack house, they were my family, pretty much. I've been living with them since I was young. And a lot of them were in jail, and some were dead, and some were dying.
I turned my back on everything and everyone that made me who I was. I exulted in a kind of frenzy of conspicuous consumption. The cocaine, that fine little dust of a white powder, stripped it all away. why? Because it made me feel good for a little while. And I traded everything for that white stuff.
Denial is a type of thinking pattern that occurs at a level below awareness. In other words, when a person is in a state of denial, he or she is not really aware that they are thinking that way.
Denial means self-deception. Jean-Paul Sartre put it better, the attempt to flee what one cannot flee, the attempt to flee what one is. That's denial. The person who says, I'm not an alcoholic, in general, is not lying. He or she really believes I'm not an alcoholic. You know, deep down, if I wanted to stop, I could.
I mean, I still had a job. I was doing well at it. I had money in the bank. I'd never been to jail or had a car accident. I was the model of self-sufficiency. So how could my life be unmanageable?
So I decided I would take one Valium. And then I thought, why not take one Valium for every year of my life? Plus one to grow on, like candles on a birthday cake. So I took 38 Valium, and at that time, it made perfect sense.
And it was almost the same at all these meetings, you know. I listened to all these guys stand up and tell how bad it was for them. I thought to myself that it's just a liar's club, with everyone trying to tell a story that sounds worse than the guy before him. So I told them what I thought they wanted to hear, bullshit stories. You know what I mean? And after a while, I ran out of material, and I had to start telling it like it was. Like the time I was on a drinking binge for several days and nights, wake up with a different woman beside me every morning, not remembering her name or what I'd done. And then one morning, I heard on the news that my friend who was with me the night before at the party had gone out and shot 7 people, and he killed 5 of them.
And I decided to take a photo of myself. So I got out the Polaroid camera. I remember having trouble loading it, and I took a picture of myself. I woke up the next morning and I was disgusted at what I saw. I looked out of control, sick.
My life was unmanageable, I knew that. I mean, I'd had some terrible things done to me, and I'd allowed these things to happen. I'd put myself into situations where these things could happen to me. I've been raped several times. A lot of things had happened to me that would leave a permanent mark on my life.
And I wound up in the hospital and later in the psychiatric unit for several weeks. And it was there that a counselor and I were talking, and I told her that I was crazy. And because of that, my husband drank. And she said, have you ever considered that you're acting crazy because your husband drinks?
Well, the addict alcoholic's brain is telling them that they are still getting some good out of the drug, and they're very afraid to give it up. So although these circumstances are occurring around them that are destroying their lives, they still want to protect the source. They would like to clean up the circumstances, but they really would not like to stop the use, because they do perceive that the use of the chemical is giving them some positives, such as alleviating fears, and although they don't consciously think of that, they do see there are still positives about the use of chemicals at that time.
This is my second chance at recovery. The first time lasted 3 years, and then I was back using and drinking for 3 more. I realize now that my addiction was out in the parking lot doing push-ups. I went through the motions of surrender, but I thought that if I just took a breather, I could control my use of alcohol.
I went back to drinking for several more months, drifting in and out of the program, getting sober for a while, thinking that I wasn't an alcoholic going back to the bottle.
I have a friend who I partied with right through high school. A big drinker just like me. And he found himself in a detox center and then in the hospital. So I went to see him and we talked, and he said he was finally ready to do something about his alcoholism. So, and I came back the next day to give him the AA Big Book. The bed was empty. He had died. 37 years old.
I'd just gone through a major refinancing. One last-ditch attempt to try and stay afloat. Part of that refinancing was to set aside $5,000 for my daughter's tuition at university. The one daughter I was still maintaining some sort of contact with. Trying to exercise a little bit of responsibility. I spent all her money on cocaine. I smoked it all in one weekend.
And then my first wife left me. So I got into a second marriage, and that lasted less than a year, mainly because of my womanizing. And then I arrived at my shop, still drunk one morning, and made a pass at my best employee, and she quit. That's when I hit bottom.
So eventually I discovered that there were several garbage bins outside of this convent near my building. So I started taking my bottles there. One night, I went there half intoxicated as usual. I opened up my usual bin. I found that the nuns or some other kind soul had left me some literature from Alcoholics Anonymous. It was dark, there was no one there. But I felt really exposed.
One night I was smoking, with a friend of mine. And it was my best friend. And she OD'd, she started having seizures and stuff. So I had to take her to the hospital, and she didn't make it. She died that night.
I was humiliated. And I had to decide right then, either I get some help or I commit suicide.
I didn't know what I was going to do. I was really scared, and I was really messed up over my friend. So when I was thinking about all this stuff, I walked around this corner, and I didn't know what I was going to do or anything, but I had all this stuff on my mind, and then I saw the Salvation Army, and I didn't even really think about it, I just walked in there and asked them for help.
For some people, bottom is almost a kind of obscenity. It's lying in your own vomit in the gutter. For others, this is doing something atrocious, hurting a loved one in some way, perhaps even causing the death of someone. Within the first 5-7 years in AA, though, they begin talking about high bottom drunks. Bottom being perhaps the loss of a job. Bottom being just hitting a loved one once. Bottom being a look in a child's face. Bottom is something that happens inside. Bottom is the realization, I am not who I thought I was.
So right away the next morning, I called AA, and I said, could you please send someone over to make my husband stop drinking, or cut down, or something? And this really nice man said, that isn't what we do here, but I can give you the number for Al-Anon. This is for people who are family members of alcoholics, or close to somebody that drinks.
At that time in my life, I was so lonely and depressed. I figured the only thing I could do was to end my life. So I ran a truck right off the road and down into a culvert.
I started reading the literature right away. I took everything that they had that was free. I wasn't willing to spend any money yet. I went home, I went upstairs, locked myself in the bathroom, and by 2 o'clock in the morning, I had read everything I had brought home. And I went to meetings. I went to 9 a week in the beginning. I was so beaten down. I was willing to do anything they said without question.
If there's a cold blizzard outside and we don't accept it, we walk outside and become very uncomfortably chilly. We surrender to it, so to speak, by putting on a warm coat and recognizing that the problem is there. So surrender, in essence, is another term for the dissipation or the breakdown of denial, where a person recognizes that there is a problem there and that they have to do something about it.
guess I just decided to live rather than to continue the live fast, die young, leave a beautiful corpse crap that alcoholics and drug addicts and some arts reporters love to think is so cool.
After several months in the hospital, someone came and visited me, and they found me and took me to a meeting. I remember at those meetings crying a lot. It seemed like forever. I think it was at that point in time when I realized that I really wanted to get sober.
There's nothing very beautiful or romantic about your head in a toilet bowl, drowning in your own hemorrhage blood, choking to death in your vomit in the basement of some hole in the wall downtown.
I wouldn't have survived on the streets, you know. I couldn't walk around. I was like, I would get too tired. So I had no place to go, and so I just gave up.
And I remember one night a woman said to me, "Nancy, there's a plan for your life. You're going to arrive at that destination no matter what you do. You can go kicking and screaming, or you can stand up and walk with dignity."
Here is a mature, intelligent, professional young woman who's only had one brief relationship with a man, who has had no friends, is full of fear, and basically has no life outside of her drinking and her work. I'm a logical, rational person, so when I looked at this, I could accept this step without any great difficulty. I surrendered.
We have heard the actual testimony of people recovering from the life-threatening diseases of alcoholism, drug addiction, and other dependencies. They are conquering failure, chaos, and despair, and are now living creative, purposeful lives. We are indebted to them for their willingness to tell us about their journeys to the edge of the abyss and back. In 1935, in Akron, Ohio, an alcoholic stockbroker told his story to an alcoholic physician. Both had been diagnosed as hopeless, but by talking to each other, they stayed sober. And from their sobriety came Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps. Still today, these steps are proving to be uniquely effective as a method of recovery from the devastation of alcoholism and other life-threatening addictive diseases. It is estimated that there are 13 million alcoholics and drug addicts in North America today, and that up to 130 million lives are profoundly impacted by these diseases. What you are about to see is taken from the true stories of actual people who have come back from the edge, some even from the brink of death itself. These courageous individuals are among the 5 to 7 million North Americans who are recovering from their addictions through regular use of a 12-step program. They tell us what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now.
I'm looking at the baseball bat in the corner and thinking how I'd like to smash your head in with it.
I was driving down Main Street one day. A guy cut me off. Gave me the finger. Well, I did what any red-blooded man would do who's got his act together. I ran full on into him when he stopped at the next intersection.
I was trying really, really hard at that time to control my drinking because I knew how it made me act.
I was totally flipped out, you know. I was like a maniac. And the only thing I could think about was crack.
I remember a friend and myself. We were sitting across the table from each other and using drugs. And we started asking ourselves, why don't we have girlfriends? Why don't we go out at night? You know, why don't we enjoy ourselves?
I'd go home, get drunk, do stupid things, go to bed and wake up feeling horrible, then go to work. I'd go home, I'd get drunk, do stupid things, go to bed and wake up feeling horrible, and on and on. That was my life.
Those who begin to recover from the addictive diseases must first recognize the irrationality as well as the consequences of their destructive behavior, and to accept the need to reach out from their individual fortresses of isolated chaos. Then they begin, however slowly, to understand that reconnecting with life is possible, and most important of all, that there are others with the same problems who are working together towards recovery.
Who would choose this? Call out to a room full of people. Who wants to be an alcoholic? I sure wouldn't put my hand up. I didn't choose this.
Sane women do not go to the liquor store at 10:30 at night on a Saturday and wear their bathrobes.
Well, the senior partner of our law firm, he has these really thick Coke bottle lenses in his glasses. And I guess I thought they were kind of funny because I went around behind the bar and I got these two great big water tumblers and I held them up to my eyes and went crawling around behind him, mimicking him. And luckily, he didn't see me, or I'd be fired now. But quite a few of the other people there did, and I can tell you they weren't impressed at all.
But right after I finished treatment, I went back to using. I had one drink. It was only one drink, so it wasn't like I went on a binge or anything, you know?
Sane women don't hide their garbage outside convents. And sane women don't phone up old classmates they haven't talked to in 5 years at 3 in the morning.
But then a week later, I went out and I had a couple more drinks, and I snorted a little Coke. And it wasn't long after that that I was buying a gram of Coke and a bottle of whiskey, and I was running home and locking the doors.
I found some specific evidence that my husband was fooling around. And later, he noticed I was being very quiet, and he asked me what I was thinking about. And I said, I'm looking at the baseball bat in the corner and thinking how I'd like to smash your head in with it. And then I told him what I knew, and he said, well, that doesn't matter because I'm leaving you anyway, because he said that I wasn't any fun anymore.
I was about the last person to leave the party. I stayed right till the bitter end, and as a matter of fact, I think I recall some guy throwing me out. I don't know, I get lonely sometimes, and I was feeling lonely that night, so I thought that I would go and see this old boyfriend of mine, which was a big mistake, because he wasn't too kind to me at the best of times. So I went over there, and I knocked on the door, and he wouldn't let me in. So he lives on the riverbank, so I went and got a few good-sized rocks and I started throwing them at the window. I was trying to get his attention. And that woke the neighbors up.
Well, I didn't use the baseball bat. But my husband called my sister in another city and told her I needed psychiatric help. And he was putting me on the next airplane. So he went upstairs and threw some of my clothes in a suitcase, dragged me to the car, and drove me to the airport. But on the way to the ticket counter, I sat down on the floor and I would not budge. So he didn't know what to do.
Most people who are chemically dependent are not mentally ill. However, under the influence of alcohol and drugs, they may act in particular ways as a result of their loss of control over their behavior and their thinking caused by alcohol and drugs. They may act in a particular way which mimics mental illness. They may do things that other people would claim are, quote, crazy.
What we're talking about even more these days is that the insanity in step 2 is talking about the fact that we have believed a lie, that we have believed that we can do something when we really can't. We have believed that we can continue to drink. We have believed that we can continue to use drugs or continue to engage in addictive behavior when we can't do it. And that's the insanity.
My life was such a disaster, you know, that I knew there was definitely something wrong with me. But I just didn't want to admit that it was the drugs, you know, because the drugs were like my friend. And I didn't want to give them up, so I would make up the most amazing stories, you know, why it was okay for me to do them.
I mean, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't wash my clothes. Like, I had the washer, the dryer, the soap, and the dirty clothes. But I couldn't seem to put it all together.
Have you ever told yourself, and others, and meant it sincerely, that you were going to do something? Well, I did it time and time again about stopping drinking and drugs. And just couldn't do it.
And even the couple of times that I did stop doing them, you know, and I stopped doing crack, I get everything back together. Like I get a welfare check, and then I get, you know, an apartment and some clothes and stuff. And then every time, you know, I'd start doing crack again, and within like a matter of days, I'd lose everything I had.
Clearly my behavior was not as rational and careful as I would have preferred. I was terrified of the lack of control over it.
And each time that I failed, I felt so depressed, ashamed, and miserable that I needed to put those feelings away again.
You've got to remember that I am a confirmed atheist. I couldn't accept the fact that there was this power or this being that could enter my brain and make it function properly.
Well, I mean, as an addict, you know, I look back over my life and at my childhood, and I wonder if there was a higher power. Why did he make me go through all that stuff that I went through? You know, like, why did he give me all these obstacles to jump over?
Me thinking about God was like thinking about my parents. They both kind of abandoned me. So my way of dealing with that was just to decide that God didn't exist.
Well, I believe that every alcoholic addict has been seeking a power greater than themselves their entire active addiction life. And so what it's important to do is get a power greater than yourself in your life that won't kill you.
Step 2 is the moment of truth for me. I dreaded it. Once the words registered, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, I was terrified. I don't know why, but I was. I mean, I had a good Catholic education. I was an altar boy taught by Jesuits. I never consciously made a decision to leave the church or anything, to become an atheist, but I did leave the church.
I was always turned off religion and spirituality because my mother slowly went insane, and while this was happening, she turned to the power of the Lord, which I figured she did because there was nothing else that she could hold on to. So I saw spirituality as something that only the insane people would believe in.
I'm pretty used to taking care of myself. I always had to, like when I was a little girl. My parents were too drunk, and they were fighting all the time, and you know, they weren't paying any attention to me, so I had to take care of myself. And then when I was older and I started running away, you know, and then eventually I ran away and didn't come home anymore, I had to take care of myself on the streets.
When I started my recovery, I had no spiritual foundation whatsoever. All I had was a lot of bad feelings about growing up in an alcoholic family. And the major thing about that experience was that I felt that I couldn't really trust my mother to be there when I needed her. And I couldn't really trust my father either. The way he dealt with problems was, he was always at work. And I felt ashamed of who I was. I thought that I was to blame for their reaction to me, and that maybe if I'd been a better person, that my mother wouldn't have drunk so much.
When I came to the program and they said that there was a higher power that wanted to take care of me, I didn't believe them because I didn't see, you know, why it would be any different now, you know. I mean, there was never anybody to take care of me before. And then I thought that even if there was somebody who wanted to take care of me, I didn't know if I'd let them, you know, because I thought I was doing a pretty good job by myself.
At one point during my relapse, I thought it was all over. I was really high and I felt like I was gonna have a seizure. And I said, if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna do all the coke that I have left, which I did. And then I thought, what the hell am I doing this for? And it wasn't like I was religious, but I got down on my hands and knees and I started to cry. I said, God, if you get me through this night, I'll really start to listen. And after that, I went to sleep, and I slept well.
I guess the crux of step 2 is that if I'm not the boss, who is? I mean, it doesn't matter who or what the boss is. I mean, it could be God, could be anything. But if I'm not the boss, then who is? And where is the responsibility lying? If I'm the boss, then I make all the day-to-day decisions. I mean, if I don't want to make any plans, I don't make any plans. No big deal. But if I'm not the boss, then what's expected of me? What am I supposed to do?
But when I looked around at the room and I saw the people that were remaining sober, I realized that they had all accepted this step. So I had to make a choice if I wanted to stay sober. And I wanted to stay sober. Either I address the issue or I don't. Either I accept the fact that there is a power greater than myself, or I don't.
I wasn't thrilled. I was not thrilled. I guess deep down in my soul, I knew that once I accepted the fact that I was not the boss, and the drugs and the booze were not the only things that I was going to have to give up. I had a real problem with this whole idea of the question of a power greater than myself and delivering me from insanity. But I had made a commitment to the steps, so I went for a walk. I was in Southern California. It was hot, must have been 100 degrees. And I was thrashing this through, and I was lucky. This little scrawny desert rabbit walked out into the path in front of me. This baby rabbit. I mean, he didn't talk to me, but I talked to him. Probably the least insane thing I'd done in the last 20 years.
I did start to notice these coincidences, you know. I remember one day I was having a really bad day, a really rough time, and I went into this record store, you know, and the first record I picked it up and I flipped it over and it had the Serenity Prayer written on it. It blew my mind. You know, or I'd be walking down the street and I'd be thinking of a song and then I'd walk into a donut shop and it would be playing, you know, that kind of stuff. So I knew that there was something going on.
And I said, so what are we going to do now? And this little guy just sat there and looked at me. And I remember looking over and seeing the mountains. The sun was setting behind the mountains. This warm wind was blowing. And then it was like there was this big panoramic view of me and this little guy sitting there in front of me, and the mountains, the sun, the wind blowing over me. And it was like I was part of the world, part of the system somewhere where people are born, they get old, they die. I mean, I wasn't at the center of it anymore, but I was part of it. I know that. I was definitely a part of it.
Well, the whole process of recovery is reconnecting to life. Through our addictions, we die in a spiritual way, and in terms of the way that we relate to life, we become this self-involved individual who has such a constricted experience that the drug creates. We're constantly preoccupied with the drug, how to obtain it, how we're going to do it next, with the consequences of what's happened as a result of its use. And as we recover, our experience broadens and our connection with life deepens. We begin to reconnect with people, with ourselves, with the world around us in a whole different way. And that's what the spirituality is about. It's about coming back to life.
I could see myself in that system. And I realized that I had been trying for years not to be a part of it. I've been fighting it. I've been afraid to be part of whatever that was. And I knew that if I could get myself in sync with that, if I could find that flow, then this warm wind would not only give me the strength to go on, but it would heal all that had happened before. And I knew then I was ready to embrace step 2. It was as easy as that. But I was lucky.
In a sense that I believe that the Spirit resides within me, which means that I can fit the entire spiritual aspect of this program into my present belief system without being disrespectful. I am my own spirit, and combined with the spirit of other people in the program, comprises a higher power.
What's often suggested for people in AA, what is most usually suggested from the beginning if they have trouble with a higher power concept, is look, there's the group. Here are a group of people who can do what you have been unsuccessful doing, not drinking. They are a power greater than you. Put your faith in them.
As complicated as a power greater than oneself needs to get is that a group of people can accomplish more and have more power than one can do alone. I've seen many people try to get sober by themselves unsuccessfully, yet when they get into a group, almost instantaneously, their feelings of hopelessness and shame are reduced to the point where significant recovery can begin immediately. Working with others with like problems is essential.
Well, I mean, when I was going to the meetings, I was seeing people who were staying clean, and their lives were coming back together. And so something was happening, you know? I mean, there was people my age staying clean. I'd never seen people my age clean. And also, you know, these people in the meetings, it was really different for me to have people around me that wanted to help me. And that's what I had at the meetings.
It finally dawned on me that I was listening to people who were telling me stories that were way more painful than anything I had to tell. And they were sober, they were clean of drugs. they seemed quite happy. That room was usually filled with love. And so that's when I came to believe.
Really, more than anything else, is that, you know, I really didn't feel that I deserved to be where I was. And a lot of my friends had died. And I was there. I mean, there was people around me, they were helping me, and I was staying clean like they were. And I knew that I wasn't doing that on my own, that I was being helped through that. So that's how I came to believe.
We have heard the actual testimony of people recovering from the life-threatening diseases of alcoholism, drug addiction, and other dependencies. They are conquering failure, chaos, and despair, and are now living creative, purposeful lives. We are indebted to them for their willingness to tell us about their journeys to the edge of the abyss and back. In 1935, in Akron, Ohio, an alcoholic stockbroker told his story to an alcoholic physician. Both had been diagnosed as hopeless, but by talking to each other, they stayed sober. And from their sobriety came Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps. Still today, these steps are proving to be uniquely effective as a method of recovery from the devastation of alcoholism and other life-threatening addictive diseases. It is estimated that there are 13 million alcoholics and drug addicts in North America today, and that up to 130 million lives are profoundly impacted by these diseases. What you are about to see is taken from the true stories of actual people who have come back from the edge, some even from the brink of death itself. These courageous individuals are among the 5 to 7 million North Americans who are recovering from their addictions through regular use of a 12-step program. They tell us what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now.
I mean, how can a nun be an alcoholic and in jail?
When I heard God and higher power, I say, give me some money and I would believe.
I didn't even like the sound of the word God.
But how could I trust a white God who would allow people to bring booze and drugs to my people?
Someone reminded me that I was very good at turning my will and my life over to my husband. So why not try my higher power? I might have better luck.
Religion made God a four-letter word for me. And I wouldn't have dealt with the idea at all if I hadn't been forced to.
I have something that I believe in, and I'm staying sober. Through that something I believe in, and it's mine, and I don't really want to share it with anybody.
alcoholics and addicts had to decide that they had had enough, and to further decide that they would actively seek help outside of themselves, and in so doing embrace some of the uncertainties and mysteries of life. Very difficult decisions to make and to carry out, because the powerful forces of denial don't go away easily. Each of them engaged in a personal struggle to end their isolation and their frustrating attempts to control their disintegrating lives.
The idea to turning my life over to God to make better my life was stupid.
For a long time, I was a star, or at least trying to be a star. And I wasn't willing to listen. I wasn't going to give myself over to some higher power.
I believed in molecules, reason, rationale, and the power of thought. I'd created for myself a very neat, orderly universe, and I wasn't interested in having any random elements introduced into my life at this stage of the game.
I never made mistakes. At least, if I couldn't make a mistake, no one else was allowed to make one. And if they did, I'd get angry. Of course, I would drink when I got angry. So for a long time, I was the be-all and the end-all in this world.
I guess my problems initially came because I thought they were talking about some entity out there. And I couldn't accept that there was something abstract out there which could have an interest in me. And that I could turn my problems over to in any way that would be acceptable to me.
But I just know that the alcoholic mind resists getting sober. And it will look for ways out. It will look for a loophole. And the word God, higher power, spirituality can be words that bring distaste to the alcoholic's mind from something in the past, and they can use that as a loophole. Denial is going to take roost wherever it can to return the person to the drug of choice. As much as one wants to get better, there's an equal force at work attempting to get the person to return to where it's most comfortable, which is medication.
I remember my mom dressing me up for a Sunday Mass very early in the morning. I still wondering why she didn't go with me. It was so good.
I was always trying to impress everyone, including God. And I felt that God was very distant and demanding, a lot like my father. So I performed very hard and was always looking for approval.
And I saw too many things inside the church that any religious seems fanatic and is a lie. Everything is false there.
But I think for many people, the whole concept of God is so interwoven with traditional beliefs that it does put people off initially. And so in that way, I think maybe it's too bad that we have to use that word. But it's so broad in how it can be interpreted in terms of the 12-step program that it does not have to be a problem.
Well, at first I thought I was getting into a cult, you know, and I thought that they were telling me that I wasn't going to make it unless I believed in their God. And I'd had a bad experience with cults before, you know, and like I got out, but some of my friends didn't get out. But I didn't reject the program totally, you know, and I'm glad I didn't.
And for me, God represents that mysterious force that puts a design or a symmetry on the universe. It's not a big idea. I mean, it's not hard to handle, and there's not a lot of rules attached to it.
It wasn't hard to believe that there was a power greater than myself. I was brought up that way with the teaching that The creator and the power of everything was in everything.
I don't know why I stuck around. I guess maybe just because I believed the people, you know, that told me that they'd been where I'd been, that they'd been as low as I've been. And, you know, they seemed to be happy and they weren't doing, you know, drugs and alcohol anymore.
I was so stupid, thinking that I was controlling my life, and fighting the idea that there was some sort of God or resource that could empower me to help myself.
I'm a geneticist. I knew that I could create life or new life forms. I could take animal cells and human cells, fuse them, and have a hybrid. That's a power over living things.
I know my problem is with my ego. And getting it cut down to size isn't a one-time thing. Today I know I have to work on it all the time. The consequences if I don't are deadly for me. And like I said before, I took a drink once and I was drunk for 3 years just because my defenses were down.
I wanted to control my life and my future. And I thought, once I get sober, once I have no more blackouts, once I know what I'm doing, I'm back in control.
Just prior to going into treatment, I had a recurring dream. 5 nights in a row, 2 close friends of mine appeared to me and begged me to go to California. In the dream, it wasn't clear why I should go, but I knew that my life was in the balance. And I woke up crying and very frightened. That sort of thing doesn't happen to me.
Then one day, a woman said to me, "Jennifer, you're quite an intellectual, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "You've been thinking about yourself and where you're going all your life, haven't you? You've planned your whole life." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Jennifer, you're in AA. That's where your thinking has brought you."
I know the thoughts I was supposed to have. I know I'm supposed to apply them, but sometimes you just can't. So now I know that I have to look outside of myself for help sometimes.
But these friends were smiling in the dream. And so I chose to interpret that to mean that death maybe wasn't so fearful. And then, 2 months later, there I am, entered into treatment in California.
The persistence of holding on to the control has to do with the sense of life being so chaotic and out of control because of the drug experience that the addict tends to try to cling to anything else that can make life seem manageable. They become very controlling and manipulative and trying to make life make sense and have some kind of shape and sanity in the midst of the chaos of the addiction. But it is always difficult, even though we have, or the addict has turned their life literally over to the chemical, that the idea of turning it over to something else that they can't control is terrifying. And it has to do with that fear, the tremendous terror that comes from addiction and the chaos that it produces.
When I came to the program, all I had was me, you know, and my will. I didn't have any money or clothes or anything. So when they asked me to turn my will over to something or somebody, it was like they're asking me to cut off my leg, you know? It was like, no way. So, and I still have a really hard time with it, you know? I'm still not very good at going like, here, you deal with it.
Because I really did think that I had control. An example of this illusion of control was one night when my husband came home at 4 a.m. We were going to have a party that night, and he had wanted to have the party. So I made him get up, as tired as he was, mow the yard, clean up around the house and just generally work his butt off for the party that night.
When I look back at my life, I mean, I can see now that I turned my will over to a lot of things. I turned my will over to crack, and I turned my will over to men. But at least then I always knew what I was going to get, you know. I was going to get abuse. And that was maybe comfortable for me because I was used to it, you know.
I couldn't do anything without getting high before. So I was so aggressive that they gave me the money. But I realized, because I saw myself putting that needle again in my vein, that I couldn't support myself. And that's not the man that I want to be. So something inside was telling me that I have to get help. I need somebody.
But the illusion was broken very soon as he got drunker and drunker again at the party, and I got really embarrassed. I guess I knew then deep down this was probably something I couldn't control.
Well, now it's time for me to get back to my Creator. Whatever strength and direction I get from this has got to be better than what I was doing.
But this turning my will over to a higher power, it was really hard because it was turning my will over to something that I couldn't see, and that meant that I had to trust, and I'm not very good at trusting people.
I also felt the decision would help me get rid of my fear. It did. Because I was a big kid, a big little boy. For all the fighting that I did, I was never very brave. I felt all my fear all my life. And now it's difficult with the knowledge that I could die because of this disease, alcohol.
When I first, heard about turning my will over, I didn't know what it meant. I still don't know what it means, but it got easier once I found out that there was something there to turn my will over to.
I heard somebody says that it doesn't really matter who you turn your life over to, as long as you take that life out of the hand of that idiot. The loco was me. The idiot was me.
Well, I decided to run a few practical tests. I decided to turn a few of the pieces over of my life. And one of those pieces was my job, my hunt for a new job. Rather than lobbying and campaigning for every job I heard of, I started to talk about my problem with other people. And I was stunned at the advice I got from some of the most unlikely sources.
I had to start trusting in the life process, which is really just growing up, maturing. I had learned a long time ago that I could numb the difficult moments, but the result was that I didn't develop.
I began to sense that when I stopped trying to control everything, when I let things happen, well, it's not necessarily a recipe for disaster.
I thought that I could come up with a good answer. I could answer anything, but I couldn't. I have to accept the truth. And that was the beginning for me to be clean.
But once I got sober again, I started to listen a little more, and things started to change. I used to laugh at the guys who used to pray before games. And now I look back on it and I think, I wish I had their faith.
The consequences that did come about as a result of our chemical usage, those were life's way of trying to get our attention, of kind of knocking on the door of, hey, wait a minute, you need to stop and take a look at this. And what most of us have done, of course, is I'm going to live my life the way I want to. You know, leave me alone, I can do it myself, and we barge ahead. Well, what happens is those consequences become stronger and stronger until we can no longer ignore them. And that's, I believe, because life loves us so much that we're getting this continuous feedback to stop and take a look at it so we can change our behaviors, we can change the way we look at life.
Well, for example, I went to the doctor a couple of days ago, you know, and I had some tests done, and I won't be getting the results for a couple of weeks. And I had to say, Gloria, just turn it over, you know? I mean, I can't worry about it today. I'll worry about it then when I go to get the test.
I have a good job now, and I know a level of job contentment that I never knew before. Oh, it's of interest to note that the job that I thought I was right for, the one I didn't get, that was eliminated 8 months after I would have started it.
If I worry about it today, I'm going to convince myself that I have like cancer or some terminal illness, and then I'm going to say, well, if I'm going to die anyway, I might as well go out and do crack. And, you know, I mean, these are the things that my brain does, you know. It makes me want to use crack. And so I have to just like let go of it, you know. I'll worry about it that day. And that's turning it over.
I think the third step, the focus is on the word decision, and this is the protection against going too far with spirituality as a letting go. In other words, this is back to limited control. There's something that we can do. We do have a will. And therefore, just as the mind has to be used, but the mind cannot know everything, so the will has to be, the choices have to be made. We are capable of making choice. We are capable of making decisions. So make a decision. This is not, therefore, sort of lay back, let it all happen, man, isn't it wonderful, let it roll over you. Sobriety doesn't come that way.
When I got into step 3, it was sort of like I had to seek out some of my elders and my people, and they helped me renew my trust in a creator, and a creator of all things in the universe, in all his creations. Talking with the elders got me thinking about who was helping me in my life, and that I needed somebody in my life to kind of show me that I still had a choice.
I think I try to stay in sync with things, with the world, the universe, whatever that is, the system around me, which means not fighting the flow, not fighting, trying to escape from whatever it is that I'm involved in.
And it also lets me feel part of what Matthew Fox has called the cosmic dance. I've always wanted to celebrate life and its mysteries. Well, alcohol gave me the illusion of being more alive, even while it was making me less alive. I am so grateful for my recovery.
And I really believe that the Creator works through all kinds of people. And knowing that I had a choice helps me to develop a good sense of trust.
It's knowing when to go with the flow, trying to determine what my responsibilities are, how I can determine, grow, mature. How does pain help me grow? How can I learn from my difficulties and respond creatively to life's challenges?
So I kind of see step 3 as a starting process, not of something, turning over something new, but kind of plugging myself back into something I already knew.
And for me, it's like, I know that as long as I don't drink and I don't do drugs, I'm not going to die. You know, and for me, that's the care of God. It's just as long as I stay clean, everything's going to be okay. And I've never had that feeling before in my life, you know, that everything will be all right. It's a new feeling for me. It's really good.
We have heard the actual testimony of people recovering from the life-threatening diseases of alcoholism, drug addiction, and other dependencies. They are conquering failure, chaos, and despair, and are now living creative, purposeful lives. We are indebted to them for their willingness to tell us about their journeys to the edge of the abyss and back.